Hello. Oh, good morning. Welcome to Borealis, day 3, and welcome to Bergen Kunsthalls. My name is Peter Meanwell. I'm a Kunstnerisleder, artistic director for the festival, and very happy to welcome you here on this slightly moved conversation. So thank you for being here and watching the time change. It's always a great pleasure to collaborate with Bergen Kunsthalls. We've done it over many years, not only because we share many different interests in music and visual art, but also because we both have series of conversations, which are super important, I think, for festivals, that we not only hear stuff, but we talk about it too, and think about the ideas that inspire and motivate the artists who are involved in the festival. So it's been really wonderful to work with Nora Sancha-Almers, who's the live program curator here at the Kunsthal, in putting today's conversation together. So I want to say hello to Yulan Grant. Hey Yulan, thanks for coming all the way from New York, and hand over to Nora, who's going to introduce a little bit about the talk.
Cool, thank you, Peter. Yeah, also a warm welcome to Bergen Kunsthalls. As Peter said, I'm Nora Sancha-Almers, live program curator here at the Bergen Kunsthalls, and yeah, it's been a great pleasure to collaborate with Borealis Festival today. Also on this discursive event series, we have the series called Plattform, and we collaborate with the Borealis Samtale this time. And Plattform is a series of talks and discussions, panel discussions as well, where we try to expand our exhibitions and events and dig deeper. And I'm extremely happy also personally to have Yulan Grant today here, who's also known as SHYBOI. And she's a DJ, a multidisciplinary artist and researcher from Jamaica based in New York City, and a researcher currently, research fellow with the Technology and Social Change Research Fellow at Harvard Kennedy School Shorenstein Center. And in her practice as a researcher, but also I would say as an artist as well, she interrogates ideas of identity, notions of power, and also the perceived histories and entanglements within these topics. We have another talk today at 1 p.m. with Roscoe Mitchell, who's also a part of the exhibition downstairs, which I invite you to check out. And yeah, I also hope to see you all back on Saturday, where Yulan will perform downstairs in Landmark and will open our club event. Thank you, Yulan, for coming over. I'm really excited for your talk.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. Yeah, once again, thank you everyone for having me here. I haven't left the United States in over 2 years, so it feels very crazy to be here, but Bergen has been absolutely beautiful, and the hospitality here is very much appreciated. So as Nora and Peter said, I'm a multidisciplinary artist and researcher from Kingston, Jamaica. I'm currently a research fellow at the Technology and Social Change Research Project at Harvard University's Shorenstein Center. So as a creative position between Caribbean and American culture, my work interrogates ideas of identity, notions of power, perceived histories, and the entanglements that happens within these topics. So with that, I'm heavily interested in the role that media plays in popular culture, underground subcultures, and the dialogues they hope to create. I would say I have a unique perspective as a formerly extremely online person. And by nature, I'm an interloper in many of these communities that I research. And I've been following them prior to doing my official work within the Harvard University. So within this presentation, I'm going to examine memetic warfare and how that has changed from propaganda in World War II to now, using the culture wars, the 2008 election with Obama, as well as the most recent election with Trump. So with that, I also am terrible at PowerPoint because I've just been on Zoom for the past 2 years, so please bear with me. Are we seeing anything up there? Okay, perfect. Yes. So, Memetic warfare is the use of slogans, images, and video on social media in persuasive political campaigns. But before we get to all of that, do some simple breakdowns of what is a meme. This is just a regular Oxford definition. A meme is an idea, behavior, style, or usage that spreads from person to person within a culture. And here we have some various examples of memes and image macros that one will see online. And then we have older pictographs. For example, the Join or Die, which is the original colonies within the United States, which also became the basis of starting the Civil War. And as of lately has examined a new resurgence within the American political landscape. So the word meme predates the current internet usage that we have here. It was actually popularized by the evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins is a very interesting character because he is a known racist, misogynist, and Islamophobe, and with that has garnered a lot of attention. Yeah, so overall, that's a great person, right? So with that has garnered a lot of attention within the alt-right and these very distinct online communities. So with Richard Dawkins, his original definition was based on evolutionary biology and comes from the Greek root of mimeme. And basically, he wanted to have a monosyllabic word that references gene replication, but also the virality of things, right? So examples of memes can be tunes, ideas, catchphrases, clothes, you know, and his thing is that in the same way that genes propagate within the body or within, in mammals as well, it's the same way that it propagates online and through virality. So in a broad sense, it's basically just imitation. This is also another example by the essayist Mike Goodwin, and his definition of a meme is that it's an idea that functions in a mind the same way as a gene or virus functions in the body, right? It's when something is an infectious idea, you call it like it's viral, right? It's leaping from mind to mind and body to body, and with that, it crystallizes a whole new school of thought, and we see the implications of that in real time throughout the world. Then we also have Susan Blackmore here, who really just really hit home that if we take memetics seriously, then the me in the memetics, it's the choosing of itself of the construct. So with that, it's very fluid, it's ever-changing, and then with that, once you put the personal into it, it can shift throughout culture. And that creates a meme machine that propagates itself over and over again. So these are just a couple of examples of pre-2008, early 2000s culture wars that were happening. This is like after Gamergate and when we start seeing the real prevalence of social media and swarm groups. So when I think of memes, I think of a shared visual language that's being used as a cultural byproduct. All forms of language can be a political instrument, means and proof of power. It's the most vivid and crucial key to identify. It's something that reveals private identity and connects one with or divorces one from the larger public or communal identity. And with that, memes carry an idea that can be remixed and used by cultural groups to signal to each other. So with that, memes are very effective pieces of rhetoric as well as of different form of communication. But most importantly, I think something that should be reiterated over and over again is that memes are not neutral, and memes can be used as a vehicle for spreading misinformation. There's a very funny meme of Richard Dawkins, who's the character from Harry Potter. I'm sure she's acted in other things, but that's all I know her from. So with that, people always ask Richard Dawkins, how do you feel about memes moving from evolutionary biology to something that is based online? And he explains that the meaning is not that far from the original. It's anything that goes viral. And that's the whole thing is like it's a metaphor of a virus. So when anybody talks about something going viral on the internet, this is exactly what the meme is, and it looks even as though the word has been appropriated for a subset of that. So we see this jump from evolutionary biology to internet culture, and with that, especially within a lot of neo-reactionary circles, biological essentialism is something that they reiterate over and over again, whether to use that for racial essentialism, white supremacy, as well as to recruit others to come to the dark side or the right side, as they would say. So this is just a quick breakdown of different types of memes that we see online. I would say image macro is probably one of the easiest of memes to immediately visually identify. It's just a picture with text on it, right? I think we've all seen these before. And the interesting thing about this is that like it is the precursor to emoticons and emojis in the same way that would have like on Apple iOS. And with this, it had cross-cultural, cross-platform appeal because anyone could just make it, throw it online, and create different communities throughout that. Another image macro. And then this is just a form of showing exactly how a lot of these viral memes come into power and come into play. They start from more fringe social media platforms, 4chan, 8chan, Tumblr used to be a thing, no longer so much, and then crosses its way into the mainstream through things like Reddit, Instagram, Twitter. Eventually, news platforms pick it up, and then you'll see it in an ad, and that's when you know it's done, and your mom starts referencing it, you know? So now to the good stuff. What is a political meme? So a political meme is purposefully designed visual framing of a position. And with this, memes have become a new genre of political communication. And they generally have at least one of two characteristics. They are inside jokes, and they trigger an emotional reaction. So here with the prevalence of the Joker movie, which had a big influence within far-right communities, and then was able to be harnessed into political memes as well, depicting Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton as a murderer, and all of these things. So when memes work politically, they're like widely shared, and they cultivate a sense of belonging within an in-group. And if they make a compelling normative statement about a public figure or political issue, then they can harness that outrage and conversation. And with a lot of these times within social media, the purposeful siloing of groups is what helps to propagate these things. And social media, specifically Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, they've changed their algorithms in the past few years because of the recent election, but really you were seeing these hyper-partisan groups coming about, and that was inspiring a lot of virality. And because the thing that gets shared the most is things that cause outrage, people were leaning into that more and more and more. And with that, you got to see just very two separate political identities coming into the recent years within the American political landscape. And people on the left and on the right have been able to harness that. Vivian Hoche, who is a French right-wing digital consultant, even told the BBC back in 2017 that the US alt-right taught the French right how to use social media to spread their ideas, and that there is a war between the media and right-wing social networks. And with that also, there was a study by the Columbia Journalism Review back in 2017, where they said that over 1.25 million articles published between April 2015 and November 8th, 2016, so remember that's also the timeline for the US elections, showed that a right-wing media network anchored around Breitbart developed as a distinct and insulated media system, using social media as a backbone to transmit a hyper-partisan perspective to the world. So all of this is familiar, right? Memes and propaganda, use of the visual arts as propaganda is something that has existed from the dawn of time, from the First World War to now, right? So you see this with the Zapatistas back in 1994, even with Culture Comp, the culture wars of the 1970s. So here's just a brief timeline of these multiple movements that have used online politics as a way to garner sympathy as well as to garner more people on their side. I think the tipping point for a lot of this came around Gamergate, which is a long thing that I won't get into. That would require another hour, actually, but keep that as a note. And then we really saw the prevalence with this, especially during the 2016 elections, and then with COVID and lockdown, from QAnon to the pandemic, which was mostly popular within the United States, Germany, Canada, Australia, and parts of southern Italy, where they believe that COVID-19 was a hoax and it was released by the labs in Wuhan in order to destroy Western civilization. So yes, part of the culture wars, as I said before, culture comp, media polarization. Basically, the more hyper-partisan things are, the easier it is to sow discord. And with that, a lot of bad can come into play. So the thing about memetic warfare and the reason why it becomes so prevalent is that it is pseudo-anonymous and people can go in and out as they please. And with that, they're able to create a community of like-minded people that they might not know what they look like, but they feel a sense of belonging. And I think this is something that will continue to happen more and more as we shift from a community-based society into one that really just prioritizes individualistic thinking. And once you have that siloing of people feeling alone, not having community, not having people around them, they will go to whoever will make them feel like they can belong. And once from that happens, then you get these faction groups that are able to really just create havoc that we haven't seen before, and then what we really saw within the election of Trump in the 2016 elections. So the big thing about memes is remixing, right? Even if we go back to the previous slide, with the I Want You army posters, which was taken from British army posters. We see this coming up in 2016 a lot for the quote-unquote great meme wars, where they use Pepe the Frog as their calling card and symbol to create authorship within these things. Oh, this is not. There we go. So the original Pepe was from this cartoonist. It was just feels good man, He was basically just a cartoon frog that had no real meaning whatsoever. There was no resonance. It was never viral. Just a very small-time illustrator. But from there, PEPE then transformed and became a part of the visual lexicon of the alt-right. So then we see within the 2016 elections, Donald Trump using these PEPE memes that were being created of him. And that is the signaling that I was talking about before, where these people see that someone like a presidential candidate is looking at these groups, is talking to these groups, and signaling to them in a way that the mainstream at the time wasn't aware of, because they didn't know about PEPE and his reappropriation within the alt-right. So once Trump started posting all of these things, then there became a whole new momentum of people, especially online, trying to figure out how can we make sure we get him to the White House? How can we create misinformation? How can we create political distrust? How can we create cultural upheaval? Because once you have all of these conditions in play, then it's a lot easier to slip in and push whatever narrative you want to happen. So of course, there's a lot of Hillary memes. Crooked Hillary became a joke. Donald Trump obviously is a terrible, terrible person, but he is someone that was always very snappy and able to command political attention in a way that we just haven't seen in most political candidates. And because he was willing to get his hands dirty, and because people were viewing him as a political outsider as well, they basically just created these online factions to make sure every time you were online, you were seeing something about Trump. And we saw that play within social media as well as within traditional news circuits within the United States. On the flip side of that, you also had leftists creating memes for people like Bernie Sanders, as well as anti-Hillary Clinton memes within the 2016 election as well. And then we see memes really take on a new type of virality during the boom of QAnon, where they were creating new hashtags, new words that were really able to just elude all of the algorithms of Twitter and Facebook. So they were constantly changing their language to make sure that they wouldn't be caught. And it was these small signals that allowed people to fall deeper within the rabbit hole. Because part of this is also, like I said before, feeling like you're a part of a community, and you being someone that thinks that you're learning about something that no one else knows, and then there's only this group of people is aware of it, then you're going to start trying to piece things together, and you're going to go to the groups that are telling you, yes, this is right. So with QAnon, especially, that created a whole new form of online to actual IRL influence within the United States, especially, where during the lockdown, people were spilling out onto the streets, they were mobilizing, they were getting paid, most importantly, by a lot of private companies to do anti-mask campaigns, to do speeches around the country. They were flying people out to the White House. And all of this money is tangentially linked to the Trump administration, but also people within the far right, within the United States and abroad. There's been various actors from white supremacist groups in South Africa to those in Eastern Europe who viewed the United States as the perfect breeding ground to see how well information warfare online can work out. And we really see the culmination of this within the January 6th insurrection that happened in the United States. And from there, we will see what happens next, because although it wasn't successful in terms of getting Trump into the office again, we saw what can happen when thousands of people are able to organize very effectively, as well as having the financial backing to do so. And they were able to quite literally break into the White House, which is something that hasn't happened in US history since the 1800s. So another big part of this is the fact that a lot of these online mitigation techniques, they make their way into the mainstream. One of the big ones was white replacement theory, and that's still going on now, where in the United States, they're saying that the white population is slowly decreasing, and with that, there is a quote-unquote white genocide happening, right? And that has been compounded with the teaching of critical race theory, where people are saying it's okay to be white, you shouldn't be shamed for this, blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, these are things that genuinely aren't happening, but because there's such big cultural talking points, it garners a lot of attention. And within social media, you have this constant feedback loop that happens, and also people make money from it. So the social media sites make money from it. The websites that post these links make money from it, from ad revenues. And then from there, it goes into the mainstream, where people like Tucker Carlson, Laura Ingraham, and other far-right commentators then repurpose these ideas to further create this false sense of apocalyptic happenings within the world. And once from my whole thing is that once from the financial impetus to create these highly siloed groups are taken away, then hopefully we can start to more or less make people unlearn these things that they've been observing online for the past few years. This is another example of memes that were happening within the 2020 election. Presidential candidate Mike Bloomberg, who's a former mayor of NYC, multi-billionaire, formed the Bloomberg terminal for stocks, all of those things. Him and his team were DMing famous people or Instagram influencers, especially within the New York City area, asking them to post memes and then mention Bloomberg. He was getting text teams where they were sending out mass texts from people that they thought were cool or influential. Coincidentally, I did know a couple of people who were recruited by the Bloomberg team in order to create these fake viral moments, and he did pay well, so that's nice of him. But the morality of this really does come into question. Then we had Elizabeth Warren, whose team was involved in MEMETIC wars within the election as well. And then you had anti-Warren memes, of course, which this one especially is playing on Trump's famous words of calling her Pocahontas, because Elizabeth Warren claimed to be part Cherokee or part Native American, which is not true, but here we are. Then also, of course, now the current Secretary of Infrastructure, yes, Mayor Pete Buttigieg, as well as Michael Bloomberg. So yeah, once again, these are just showing you the ways in which the memes can be used not only within the far right, but within centrist campaigns, or within the far left as well. And the type of back and forth that happens where they're constantly in conversation with each other and trying to convince people about where they should and should not be online, and what kind of political ramifications that has. This was another big one that was being spread online, where they were likening Joe Biden and the Democrats as to people who are associated with gangs, with Hillary Clinton, with AOC. Basically, people were creating these meme templates to be very quickly disseminated online. And most of you have these things where you have 100 people at the same time going through the algorithms in order to really just clog up the cables. You began to see these more and more throughout the political landscape. With the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, as well as the BLM protests of 2 summers ago that started, there became another new push within MEMETIC warfare. Kyle Rittenhouse became a central figure and point in this, where he was receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars within donations for killing people, but once again, because of these highly siloed environments, they became a big financial backing of people like this. And this is where the danger really lies, because once you have people moving from the pseudo-anonymous space to one that's a lot more prevalent and in your face, then they become martyrs for a cause. And once from these martyrs become more prevalent and pushed into the mainstream, then they can recruit more and more people for what they want to do. So once again, just want to reiterate the different levels that happens within these memes, right? It's participation within an in-group. It's the remixing of known and unknown imagery that signals to these different in-groups. It's about power, it's about access, it's about positionality. It's a form of fourth generation warfare because it allows information to be distilled in a hyper way that we haven't seen before. And as we make this move from the mainstream media to social media, we need to be constantly observing these online communities. And within this ethnographic process, it requires a commitment to observation, not only during breaking news events, but also during the downtime in between. Because I think a lot of what happened within 2016 was people weren't paying attention because they thought it would not matter. And we have seen just how much politics have changed, not only within the United States, but within the globe as well through the use of social media. It's happened within India with the use of WhatsApp, within the Modi government. It's happened within South Africa, where they were sending out fake alerts saying that people are coming to take the lands of white South African farmers. It's happened in Germany. I could go on and on and on, but this is just another form of media creation that has allowed different in-groups to try and infiltrate broader society. So with that, memes, it's no longer an emerging technology imbued with the possibility of fostering social change by giving voice to small groups. social media has become a tool of the powerful to dominate, harass, and coerce vulnerable groups. If we do not acknowledge this shift, the freest speech will benefit only those who are already powerful. And that's a quote from Dr. Joan Donovan, who is the head of the Shorenstein Center and overall badass, used to be in a really great rock band, highly recommend. Yeah, so with that, I would like to really thank my cohorts who we've been working on slides and presentations like this for the past few years now, and trying to just teach people on the ground ethnographic research methodologies, how to make sure we use this within grassroots activists, community activists, and trying to take this information from the institution to on the ground, because at the end of the day, something staying within academia, to me, is completely pointless, because if you can't actually help people where they're at, then it doesn't help anyone at all. Yeah, so I think I will end there for now. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yulan. We do have the opportunity to ask some questions, if there are any in the audience. Just raise your hand. I'll come. Oh, we have double mics. It's okay, I got it. Yeah.
Thank you. Hi, Yulan. Thank you so much for your presentation. I'm really interested in this kind of in these crossovers in your practice, because on Saturday we're going to hear you in a club setting, and here we have you in a kind of lecture setting. And there are words and parts of this presentation around kind of shaping ideas and remixing that crop up in your musical practice as well. And I'm wondering how you relate the two as an artist, and how you also kind of bring your political activism into that same space, if you could.
I think for me, like as a researcher, it reminds me a lot of DJing and being a selector, because it's about like when you're looking for that one song and you're just digging constantly trying to find it. I think crate digging is the same thing as research, and that's my main way in connecting the two. Yeah, I'm not strictly in academia and don't come from an academic background, but I'm lucky enough to be a part of a team that understands how those two can relate. And that's basically how I pitched myself to get this research job, and it worked. So if you're a DJ, you're a researcher, and don't let anyone tell you different, unless you're like not too good, then that's fine. But yeah, the politics has always been something that's interested in me. I was raised in a political home. Growing up in Jamaica, politics is everywhere. Things get very violent around election time. So knowing how these really just these groups that are so far away from each other can affect each other is something I've seen like since I was a child, and like have experienced it. So politics has just always been something in the back of my head, and it's kind of hard to escape it. And to be able to escape it is a privilege, but I don't think it's a good one to have.
Sorry, I'm super interested, because in the last 2 years we've also seen, or at least I see that that club spaces are inherently political spaces, I think, and have been transgressive spaces, and have you know, you're with Discwoman agent and label in New York, and that's a kind of has a very strong political ideology. And I'm wondering kind of how you feel the last 2 years has affected with the absence of these physical, embodied political spaces and everything happening in the digital space, which is also where you, as your research tells us, this memetic warfare is happening, and whether there's this kind of contagion, or it's beneficial, or it's problematic, that there's this absence of physical transgression.
Yeah, I think people being able to gather is extremely important. There's only so much you can do online, and especially within music. I mean, I think the Zoom parties that were happening at the beginning of shutdown were great, but for me, I emotionally could not do it. I did not want to be dancing in my room by myself. It just didn't seem fun. But especially within New York and New York opening back up in the past year, you've definitely just seen a new shift in people and a different kind of reverence that people have been bringing into these nightlife spaces. That's been really beautiful to see. And a lot of these spaces have been functioning as community centers as well, because people are seeing more and more how you shouldn't extract the two, and the two shouldn't be different. Because at the end of the day, a dance floor can bring together an amazing exchange of cultural ideas, of different people that you wouldn't see in your everyday life or would never talk to. And with that, I think it's so beautiful. Within nightlife, I've gone to meet people that I would never see in my everyday life, but when we're on the dance floor, we know they're there for that one specific reason. And I think that having that commonality and that bond is something that benefits communities all throughout.
I guess my question is more back to the talk, and like in this last quote that I read, the fact that social media has become something that is a tool of the powerful to dominate, as you said, and maybe something very important is, as I also said, to talk about that and tell people that there are some power mechanisms that are there, and that's why they can't be used to foster social change. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of depressing in a sense. I'm kind of wondering if there is any possibility to foster social change through social media, maybe not the ones that we use the most, but if there are any alternatives in that sense, and if not, if you have thought about any other ways of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, social media has been used for these terrible groups, but on the flip side, I think of things like the Arab Spring, which was literally the only reason why I got Twitter, because I saw that this thing was happening and wasn't being reported in the news. So I got Twitter specifically because of the Arab Spring, and people were using these hashtags, and you're able to connect with organizers like on the ground who were doing these things. Even with the Black Lives Matter movement, you know, that really started online. So unfortunately, there is good and bad with it, but I think one of the main things that pushes the harm is the fact that social media networks are a monopoly, and within a monopoly that is privately controlled, then they're outside of governmental purview, especially looking at something like Facebook, which, you know, it's how a lot of people in various nations, that's the only way they get their news. And they essentially operate as a government, as news, as all of these things, all at the same time, but without having the same level of accountability. So with that, it's, you know, really breaking these things up in a way that power isn't consolidated, where, you know, Facebook has over 1 billion users. That's a problem. Right, because one company can't decide what works in one country and what doesn't work in the other country when you have something so wide and you don't have the capabilities or the want to invest money into learning about specific cultural ideologies and how that changes throughout the world. But yeah, I don't think social media is going anywhere. So the thing that we can do is try to figure out how to make it better for everyone else.
I also had one question that relates to this, to the quote here, because obviously social media has also been quite helpful for diasporic communities to connect all over the world, and I think it's also something that you consider in the research. And I was wondering now, thinking about this quote a little bit more, like, how do you feel this shift, because obviously this is happening, has affected these communities and the connectivity, and what are your thoughts on this moving forward?
I wouldn't say I have experienced like a shift towards the negative within those communities. I think people are learning more and more how to adapt to these technologies and how to adapt to the algorithms, especially within mutual aid networks that pop up all the time, especially in the United States. I think it's allowed or forced people to fall into the algorithm a bit more, right? Where you have to take a picture of yourself. There needs to be a picture of a human being on an Instagram post to like make sure you get pushed through the feed, and it needs to be in color, and it needs to be posted at a certain time, and it needs to have these, and with that, people are learning, and all that is good because it's the only way to really enter the algorithm. But with that, you need to figure out other ways to subvert that, and I think that only comes with corporate regulation. Yeah.
Hi there. I didn't see. I'm sorry, I was late. I was looking. I didn't see the. I was wondering if you could talk about in the indie media, the pre-social media, pre-smartphone. Like Zapatista inspired, I would think, technology, people having, people being able to report on their own environments. Say their late 90s. We saw that this international movement of people reporting on their own issues in their, for themselves is very dangerous for the people in the world. And we saw that these servers, these people who are doing these works were like raided by police internationally. And I was wondering if you could talk about like, if you hadn't talked about it earlier, just like policy shifts. Like, why is it the case that, the repression from the state was so vehement all over the world, and then with social media, reporting about your own problems or whatever's going on in your communities is encouraged. It's like the policy shifts. I never really got to understand that, and I was wondering if you could just enlighten us a little bit on that.
I think the main reason with that is, especially coming from a US-based perspective, is the massive consolidation of media that's taken place in the past 20 or so years. No, it's 2022, sorry. The past 30 or so years really pushed with Rupert Murdoch and Ronald Reagan. And from there, we just really saw the dissolution of local news media. And once from that happened and people shifted towards social media, social media wasn't seen as much of a threat, I would say. But that changes from country to country. In places like Mexico, journalists are killed every day for what they say against the government. Same within Brazil for people within the Amazon who are trying to protect the land. It's something that shifts with each government, and I think right now, especially with the United States and social media, Silicon Valley really does fund the government, so they're able to get away with a lot more.
I wanted to just ask you, how do you view social messaging apps in that regard, in terms of social media as like looking at Telegram, who allegedly gets all their financing from donations, who's obviously been very important on both sides in the recent kind of crisis in Ukraine, both for information but also propagandic purposes.
Yes, we look a lot into these, into the messaging apps as well. That is a lot trickier because of end-to-end encryption. So unless you're already within those groups and monitoring it, it becomes a lot harder. But Telegram has been a huge source of political misinformation. So has WhatsApp. WhatsApp, especially within developing nations, especially within India, and to a lesser extent within the Caribbean. Yeah, tracking it is just incredibly hard because it is encrypted. So you need to get permission. You need to get a lot of permission and a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests to get into that stuff. Yeah.
Hi. Do you think, how to phrase this, like your sort of prescription as a response to this sort of right-wing onslaught, sort of MEMETIC onslaught, seems to be largely about kind of corporate regulation, raising awareness, blah, 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 and so forth. But do you think it is impossible for the left to win a meme war? Is the playing field so unbalanced by social media's kind of bias towards outrage, which seems to be something that perhaps favors the right? Does that mean that the only response is to try and sort of de-escalate or diffuse the war? Or is there a possible kind of, sort of left-wing victory in this sort of terrain, I suppose, is the question.
Yes. So the thing is that became like a running joke within the right is that they would say the left can't meme, right? Which, not wrong. But it's something that people are like slowly learning and seeing the power of. But I think the thing that also does come to the detriment of the left sometimes is wanting to take a quote unquote moral high ground. So with that, you don't want to use the same tools as what the enemy is using. But there have been multiple interruptions, I would say, within white supremacist memetics, where people within communities are able to see these swarm factions happening and able to shut it down immediately. But we haven't seen the same sort of, I would say, influence in an election with the right and Trump as within the left.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
They didn't win, but perhaps partly some of the success of both Bernie Sanders in the States and Jeremy Corbyn in the UK is not entirely unconnected to a kind of a new sort of memeing faction amongst the young left, like the kind of actual left-wing factions of the major supposedly left-wing parties in the UK and the States did kind of better than they had done for quite a while in this era.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I'm saying there definitely has been influence. I think it's a slow turn, and it also requires I mean, I can't speak of UK politics, but you know, US politics being so hyper-siloed, and you know, like Bernie's left wing, and you know, to a further extent, I guess Elizabeth Warren and all of those people. But the thing that comes to the detriment is that you have to acquiesce to whatever the left party is, right? So even though Bernie is an independent and part of the Democratic Socialists of America, at the end of the day, he's going to sign with the capital D Democrats. So social media can only do so much when you have to also think about establishment Democrats as well. Sure. Mm-hmm. But I would say, because of the virality of people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, you were able to see a lot of talking points that would have been ignored by more centrist Democrats like Joe Biden really getting pushed into the mainstream. And they had to start adopting this language and these rhetoric in order to get the votes for people. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose the heart of my question is really like, you know, what's the better strategy for the left? Is it to just simply disengage, or to kind of fight back with the same, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
Are the risks too great that you're just going to escalate, or is it worth?
I mean, I'm team fight, so.
Yeah.
I think you should always go for it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Oh, Peter again. I'm so surprised.
Hi. I was actually going to ask, like, if there was anyone in the room who could shed any light on Norwegian meme culture, because obviously we have a great English language perspective, but I mean, in terms of the kind of notion of culture war here in Norway, Sian, which is like a kind of a right-wing anti-Islamic group that has physical rallies. There's a whole bunch of stickers and posters that around that have a certain visual culture for the right wing in Norway. But I'm just wondering if like there was anybody in the room who had any insight that they could add to the conversation. If that's okay.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you. Feels weird to stand here, but I think something that also points to what you've been talking about is that I find in a lot of leftist communities, they make memes that appeal to other leftists, while the right kind of tries to push outwards, and that can be its own detriment. Because I think in leftist communities, especially in Norway, there's a want to rally other leftists, kind of create the same mass of people that the right has, which is a good start, but it's kind of hard to see where we're going with that, because I don't think, like you mentioned, that the left here is on fight mode, especially on online communities. I mean, they definitely are, especially in some of the more outer left communities, but I think we're more about rallying than getting outwards, which is, again, a detriment and one that needs time as everything, sadly, yeah.
Peter?
I have so much more, but you know.
Okay, if Peter doesn't have anything more, then yeah, thank you, Yulan.
Thank you.
And thank you for your questions and discussion. Maybe more in the bar tonight at the festival bar again. I hope you all have some really nice moments with Borealis and also here at the Kunsthalle. And again, thank you, Yulan.
Thank you for having me.